Malaysia and Singapore for the last 7 years, where I opened the affiliate for both Singapore and Malaysia, and that I go ahead and spearhead today. I'm also the founder of an organization called Emotional Inclusion and Workforce that calls upon companies to oversee the mental wellness of their employees in a sustainable way through a medical lens and also through a very tailored, focused program. So that's me in a nutshell.
Morning, I hope you're properly caffeinated for this talk. My name is Fabienne Pellegrini. I grew up in Singapore actually, and it's really amazing to be back. I was working for Tod's and Ferragamo to set up all of their digital practices in APAC, based out of Hong Kong and in Shanghai. And today I'm a partner at LBB Asia. We are a brand management firm that helps brands set up their businesses in Asia or accelerate existing businesses in Asia. So it's really nice to be here this morning with you. And I think we can kick off the discussion.
Thank you so much. So over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about how to create brand desire. What are the different strategies that luxury brands use to actually create such long queues in front of their stores or waiting lists that seem to never end? But I think this topic is not just of interest to those who work in the luxury industry. Of course, not everyone, even in the luxury industry, necessarily not all the brands are equally successful. So executives who are in the luxury industry do have a passion to find out how do you actually manage to create that brand desire that separates the successful from the less successful. But it also applies much broader than that. It applies to premium brands, it applies to emerging brands, it applies to other sectors like hospitality, like automotive industry, fine foods, and so on. So I think you will hopefully find it quite broad and interesting in a sense, the way we've discussed it. But before I start, I'll just give you a little bit of a context of the luxury industry, where it is today. So what's interesting about the luxury industry, the luxury sector, is that in the time of the crisis, it's usually the first one to take the hit, but it's also an extremely resilient sector. And we've seen this in the last two examples, in the financial crisis of 2008, and also in the most recent pandemic. Now, what's also interesting is that luxury sector has already returned to pre-COVID times in 2021, and is expected to grow at 6% per year for the next 5 years to reach 500 billion euros by 2026. We are also seeing that there is a real heightened appetite for luxury goods. There's a surge in demand, and especially here we're seeing the APAC region, which is supposed to outperform the total market for the next few years. But this is especially impressive given everything else that's going on. So the economic and political instability, and still the some of the lingering effects of the pandemic. So my first question to start off this panel discussion is, what do you feel is driving this surge? Where is this lust for luxury from the consumer side coming from? So maybe I can start with you, Mollie.
Yeah, sure. I think this is loud. Good morning. Can we? Okay, I'll just keep it at a distance. So I think apart from the obvious factors that we've all been fed over the last few months as we have emerged from the pandemic, three factors really stand out. The first one is the omni-channel model. So the crisis has been a real catalyst, as we know, in terms of driving companies to not only develop but also execute on online and omni-channel strategies. So pre-pandemic, what was interesting was that obviously our customers were used to a very high-end in-store experience, but now what we're saying is that the online, the tailored online experience that we're having to bring to our customers is adding another platform, basically, for them to go ahead and discover brands. So there is a new platform here in terms of reach, in terms of product reach, and in terms of discovery for brands to cater to their consumers. The second point I think is interesting is how there is a renewed sort of take on luxury in this post-pandemic era. In other words, the consumers, as we know, are the stakeholders of the luxury sector, right? We all know this. But there is, in a post-pandemic phase right now, what data is actually showing is that, or suggesting, is that there is a shift in perception of how they view luxury. In other words, that might last or might not last. That points out to the fact that consumers are looking at a much more silent luxury take on things. And that's a dubbed term, silent luxury, which I found to be very interesting because I was doing my own research. And what that means is a revert to classic elements such as craftsmanship, heritage, all of which we've been fed through during decades on end in the retail world. But there's a revert to the preciousness of those two core elements within the retail world. So I think it's really interesting to analyze that. And also, we know that that scarcity in terms of product is a catalyst for desirability. And 40% of the global production in terms of luxury goods comes from Italy. And so as we have seen the large and smaller factories, the family-owned Fabiennes, et cetera, all closing down and now reopening, there is a surge in of course, gravitating towards these brands, hence catalyzing, a brand desirability in terms of the luxury field today. Thirdly, what's interesting is the emotional connection, right? We are all, and I think as consumers ourselves, emerging from this pandemic and with a need for societal connection more than ever. And it's fair to say that these luxury consumers are looking for their post-pandemic desires effectively to be soothed and comforted. So I guess those are three factors really that are interesting for us to look at amidst all of the other trends that we witnessed and heard about.
Thank you, Mollie. I think you're exactly right on all those points. What I would add as well is that we're probably also seeing a bit of still post-COVID revenge spending and a lag because China has been open for most of the time that the rest of the world was closed down, and a lot of consumption was happening on those China P&Ls. But they haven't come out of being able to travel. In fact, Chinese people cannot renew their passports actually still today, and they still can't travel freely, and there's still quarantines and tests, etc. So I think we have a bit of that post-revenge spending, but we'll also something to look forward to is the moment that the Chinese population can now travel and come back to their shopping sprees in Europe. We'll probably see it still again a second boost, and then we'll see how the market stands after that.
Thank you. Very interesting perspectives. And I think that when we talk about desire, I think it's really interesting to look back at the definition of desire. So it's this element of yearning, of longing for something slightly out of reach, which you were saying, talking about the scarcity, right? So But to create this desire, it's not an easy formula. There's no, if it was, everybody would be able to do it, right? So I think even within the luxury industry, we can see a real difference between those brands that are successful in managing to create that desire and those that are still not. So what we are also seeing is that there are perhaps some key strategies that brands have to do, absolutely have to do, in order to actually start creating those very desirable brands. So maybe as Fabienne mentioned, you worked with quite a few brands initially at the beginning of your career, but also through your consultancy. I'm sure you've seen all sorts of brands come through. What do you see as the key differences in the brands that are successful in creating this brand desire?
Well, looking at the brands that have survived and who have won through the COVID trauma that we've all been through, I think it's, first of all, you talked about a 6 to 7% growth rate, and I would say that that's definitely not across the board. There's been some big winners who gained market share and then people who didn't. And there's certainly things that they've done in common that can be noted. First of all, you mentioned earlier the 2008 financial crisis. And at the time, I think luxury brands have learned from that and they've controlled all of their distribution much better than they did then because they were very exposed. When you're depending on distributors or retailers and you're going through a crisis, you often have a conflict of interest because they're going to put their interests and their cash flow positions before your brand equity protection. So you'll have, desperate discounting and all these things, which I think this time around was much better controlled because people cleaned up. In China specifically, a lot of brands have taken back full control. And so that part was, I think, much better managed by the bigger ones. The other thing I would say is the people who really, or the brands that have really won throughout this are the ones that have a really clear brand identity and purpose. And it's recognizable by the consumer. There's a specific aesthetic and people can recognize a product with no logo on it and understand that's Chanel, that's Saint Laurent, that's Dieu, because they have a clear identity. And within that structure, they are able to define it and to expand it, but it's still who they are. I think another point is that they've also continued to invest even when everything was shut down. So for example, Chanel in 2020 increased their marketing budget by 30% to 1.8 billion, I think, which is crazy, right? Because everything is shut down. But when everything's shut down and you have your consumers who are maybe more discerning or be a little bit connecting with them is really key. And so Chanel is now, I think, 15.6 billion, and they had a 50% growth rate last year as a result. Dior as well invested a lot throughout the pandemic. I don't know if you've seen the amazing Montaigne flagship store, which is so much more than a flagship store. It has a spa and a restaurant and a BBIC hotel and all these. It's like a brand universe, really. All this investment came at a time where others pulled back because of the crisis. The first thing you cut is your marketing budget because you're unsure how things are going to work. So I think all these things together really help to secure. I think the last point that you can note is product mix, smart product mix. If you're exposed more to apparel, especially if it's formal wear or occasion wear, that's going to be a trouble in a moment where there's no place to go and there's no reason to buy, right? The brands who have successfully transitioned to more luxury casual wear and more leather goods, I think, are definitely winning. So if you take a brand like Saint Laurent, right? Saint Laurent in 2017 was 1.5 billion. They're now 3 billion. Kering just announced that they're targeting 5 billion. Saint Laurent's product mix today, and we know the Saint Laurent look, right? That it's a very clear aesthetic, that Parisian, glamour, edgy look. Today, they're selling 70% leather goods. And that's what's driving also the profitability ratio, and that helps to weather the storm in prices like this.
Thank you, very interesting. And what would you say, Mollie, from somebody who spent quite a long time within the same brand that has done quite well as well. What was your sort of insider view from the brand perspective?
Yeah, what we've seen is, again, 3 points. One is storytelling. And I know it sounds a bit, just old school to bash the storytelling again. But I think it's dire and key today, especially again, and I'm bringing back the omnichannel world we're living in today, where, we're split between our brick and mortars, we're split between our .coms, we're split between the metaverse, which if you're unlike me, I'm 101 in that field, but we still have to tackle those sectors, right? And the way we do it is through making sure that our storytelling in all of these mediums are seamless, interactive, genuine, desirability creating or desire creating, and really make sure that we are on top of our game within this realm, constantly. So that's the brand storytelling, number one. The second point is, what is your core value proposition as a brand? By that I mean, why do you exist? And I think that that's key because, again, on a brand level, we need to make sure that we convey a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging. If you exist just to make a profit, you won't withhold the sands of time. And quite frankly, you don't even deserve to exist. If your main purpose is to make sure that you make profit. So I would like to push the envelope a little bit when it comes to identity and purpose, with extending the question, if I may, of how do we truly create value for our luxury customers through our product and of course through our service. So that's my number 2 point. My number 3 point is association, the power of association, and to create further relevancy, to create as well, further impactability. There have been so many associations in terms of luxury brands lately that, to be very candid with you and transparent, I've had to jot these down because there have been so many, and I really wanted to give you the full scope, so I'll read them out to you this morning. It's still early, so I'm sure you'll excuse me. But we had, for example, Adidas x Gucci, Fendi x Versace, Gucci x Balenciaga, Remova x Dior, Fendi x Skims, that's the Kardashian brand. Dior x Sakai, Tiffany x Supreme, Miu Miu x New Balance, Tiffany x Fendi, and the list goes on. So again, the power of association is tremendous. Again, when it comes to further, catalyzing further impactability and relevancy when it comes to our market and growing market today.
And you also do a lot of collaborations with Longchamp, right? We've done a lot
We
of
do.
interesting ones, maybe not as specific as I guess maybe broader or the ones you mentioned, but you also often collaborate with artists and local artists as well as French artists, right?
Absolutely, and for Longchamp, it's always been a part of our DNA to do that. So it's not a new trend for us, but we do a lot of artistic collaborations because we believe that it's a way to stay dynamic. It's a way to be fresh and engaging towards our consumers while still staying true to our brand and to what we stand for. It's engaging, to make sure that we always stay in movement, on our toes in terms of what's being done. And we also believe in shaping the future with artists that are perhaps not as well known in order to grow their visibility. And that's part of our impact on on the next generations and on the world of art. So how we decide to implicate ourselves and within that realm is and has been for the last 73 years and more.
I'd like to dive a little bit more into this topic of brand desirability. So I think some of the things we mentioned were, both of you mentioned strong core in different ways. Have said strong DNA, something that's really recognizable, something that you stand for. You talked about the purpose, right? So you can call it DNA, you can call it core value proposition, but having that strong identity is really the starting point. Then you talked about a strong product mix. You talked about control distribution, which I think is a really good point also because you have to sometimes forego immediate profits to really control the message throughout and to have a long-term vision in terms of how you sell. You talked about brand storytelling, which is at the core of luxury, and it will never go away. So I think that's really. Oh, sorry. Is it not working? Oh. What? But I don't think it is. Oh, yeah. Sorry that people are cool. Okay. So I said strong DNA, strong product mix, control distribution, brand storytelling, collaborations or associations. But I think when we think about the new consumers today, the Gen Z, the millennials, they are more discerning, they are more finicky, their interests are more fleeting, they're less loyal. Above and beyond these things, what we've talked about, what else are key ways of maybe moving forward to bring to the table some of the luxury brands that are already doing? So maybe Fabienne, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I think, the younger consumers today for sure are really looking to differentiate themselves and be more unique and be more interesting around the career, and they want to learn and better themselves. And they also have more stronger stances on things like sustainability, and they really are expecting brands to take the lead on finding solutions with that and being true to what they stand for. I think every brand has, said the right words and put together the right statements, but the younger generation specifically is also really paying attention and really making sure that the brands are really adhering to those throughout their entire organization and through all of the touch points, etc. So I think that's a really key point that no brand in any industry, in fact, can now delay any longer. I think that transformation is started, but needs to really speed up. I think another point, and this is really for, I would say, any consumer, but what fuels brand desirability is magic, creative juices, spark. If you have a great organization, great products with beautiful materials and the craftsmanship, but you have no creativity and no, really I say magic because I believe it, then with all the money in the world, you're not going to be able to fuel that desire. And I think some brands have done some amazing things in really creating the environment and the universe. If you look at, I don't know if you've seen the Hermes Fit pop-ups that they've done, where they created basically like a dreamy Hermes gym. There's nothing to buy, by the way, in this pop-up. It's just an immersion into the universe, into the imaginary of what Hermes is, if it were a universe, basically. But they did also the Hermesmatic, where they had it like a laundromat where you could dye the scarves, and One of my favorites personally, and I know this dates back, I think it was 2014, but when Chanel came up with the Chanel supermarkets, it was, it's fun, it was light, it was delightful, really. And I think that kind of creativity is really key. If you don't have that, with all the budget in the world, you'll get nowhere in terms of brand desirability. It's a key point.
Yeah, and bouncing on your point, actually, what you're alluding to is unique brand experiential events. And I think you're spot on. I really do, because I think that that's where the trend is gravitating towards. In terms of experience, of course, we look at our brick and mortar, their in-store experience is key. But we need to bring to our consumers a more tailored, sensorial, genuine experience. And what we're seeing, to your point, again, is more and more events that are being taken out of store in order to do just that, in unique places where brands can bring in their consumers, their clients, to come and discover their brand in a very whimsical, in a very tailored and again sensorial way, and so that is being seen left, right, and center everywhere now, and I think it's really, really important to think a little bit outside of the box. Again, and make sure that we connect. And I talk about a lot of, I talk about emotional connection a lot, because we're human beings. We emote before we even reason. We're wired to feel. And I think if we don't bring in a degree of psychology within the retail realm, we will be left behind, simply put. So I think it's a really, really valid point that I just wanted to jump on.
And I think a couple of times you already mentioned talking about the omnichannel, talking about all these acceleration that has happened in the luxury industry. I think it's fair to say the luxury industry is not the most innovative industry when it comes to digital transformation, and that actually in the first year of COVID alone, if it wasn't for COVID, it would have taken the amount of innovation that happened in 1 year would have taken 10. So, how do these digital channels, whether we're talking about .com or metaverse, how does that come into play into creating brand design? Maybe Fabienne, I'll go back to you now, because I know you also worked quite a bit with the brands in China, and that's probably the fastest, even though it's totally different in terms of the channels, etc. In terms of the actual behavior and the acceleration that happens in that market, is the most fast-paced, I would say, in the world. So
yeah, definitely. China has been ahead of the curve for I would say the last decade, and they've really forced the brands to digitalize themselves a little bit against their will, to be honest, because at the beginning, 10 years ago, you would find none of the luxury brands were online, and they're like, no, it's not right, it's a mess, it's not luxurious, but the consumer really wanted it, and so they went and got the products from elsewhere and then sold it online, and then suddenly they woke up and like, wait a minute, all these customers are discovering my goods, I have nothing to do with that in that conversation, and it's all wrong. It's the wrong collection and the wrong messaging and the wrong products and definitely the wrong price. And suddenly it was like panic mode, like we have to get involved. There's no choice, right? So they kind of were forced into that game. And now there's some really interesting things that are happening in China, especially in terms of omnichannel. And I say omnichannel, it's the word that I've been hearing the most that means the least, right? I mean,
multi-channel more than omnichannel.
Exactly, right. So I think omnichannel is very, very, very difficult to execute. I think almost nobody, definitely in luxury, are really able to nail it. And to be fair, I think luxury is the industry where it's the most difficult to put together, because when you could walk into a luxury store and the salesperson has known you for 10 years and knows the names of your kids, and you have hyper-personalized recommendations because they know the type of person that you are and what kind of events you go to with given a glass of champagne in a really nice designed room. And that stuff is basically impossible to reproduce online. So if you're trying to get that online, you can't, right? And everybody's trying to see how the metaverse might be able to break those barriers, but it's not going to replace it. It's going to augment it. So we've seen a lot of really interesting plays. I would say Burberry is probably the best at it so far on how to get the online and digital, so the e-commerce part, but also the social media part and how you're communicating and the brand discoverability in digital. And I would say that there's a lot of learnings from China to be rolled out everywhere, really.
And from Mollie, for Longchamp, your cornerstone of really of your brand storytelling and where everything happens is still very much the store. And you talked about the emotional connection in the store. You talked about what needs to happen moving forward. So what is how can you elevate brand desire in the store? And as we are moving forward, we have to kind of rethink the role of the stores a little bit. So I don't know, you're doing something that maybe you cannot share, but in terms of general strategies about the role of the store and the stores of the future, what would you say that is for you?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second, but I just would like to prelude it by just emphasizing the customer service in store and how that continues to still be obviously of prime importance, and then I'll dive into what we do because I don't know about you, but I visited a store post-pandemic, which is an iconic luxury brand, and the service was terrible. I mean, just despicably terrible. And I walked out of the store. I have not bought anything from them since. So I think it's really important when it comes to our luxury consumers to not lose their confidence. And so I think that that's, a continuum of, the efforts that we need to drive when it comes to the customer service angle. When it comes to honing in on what else we can do in store, to your point, well, I think there are a few ways we can look at it. For us, at Longchamp, we want to really, and what I see a few other brands do is that they hone in on community, on a community standpoint. What I mean by that is, for example, we call on local artists to come and bring in their touch to our store design in order to add a sense of belonging. So we basically localize, a brand ethos to attract our customers to us in a new, interactive, very grounding way. And I think that's important, right? Because then you mentioned, we have so much we can do in the other realms, and store is still very much of a sensorial space. I agree to that in the sense where we need to continue to tap in on the sensorial aspects of our brick and mortar stores and keep on delving into the experiential sort of aspect of what we can offer in our stores. Another point would be to really continue to focus on the human. And I still use the omni-channel or / digital aspect in store. So for example, I can really share what we do is we are, for example, going for cashless, stores. So no cash registers anymore, right? We're not transacting in that way with our consumers. We're inviting them into our universe, and we are pulling them into our culture, our DNA, our world. We want to keep it smooth without having, let's end this transaction by going at the cash register. It's kind of abrupt, right? It's kind of it's harsh. So we're taking those out. Another point is that we're now putting welcome desks at the entrance of our stores. And that's going to be part of our concept that we'll be rolling out this year and next year. So we're busy with real estate and store design, but we understand the importance of the meet and greet within our stores. The first touch point you have with your customer is welcoming that customer within your four walls, and so what better way to do that than to have someone dedicated to doing just that at the entrance of your store. So again, it's bringing in human sort of touch points, for lack of another word, but in our stores to really bring in that authentic experience for whomever's coming to visit us.
Thank you, Mollie. So there are only a few minutes left, so I think it would be great if we could wrap up this very informative, I hope, for the audience panel discussion with maybe some key takeaways that you would say are in terms of companies that are trying to elevate their brand desire. What are some of the key takeaways that you would absolutely say to us? Yeah.
So if we're wrapping up, then in terms of brand desirability, I think the front and foremost is really to know who you are and have a clear identity, because without that, you have nowhere to go without diluting yourself and losing yourself. That's the number one point. I would say that if you look at the brands that really have fueled brand desire, there's one new industry that's been burgeoning up, and that probably luxury brands need to really pay attention to, is the secondhand market. To me, if your products have a life beyond the first owner, then that's the true testament of brand desirability, right? Because it belongs without. And I think the first instinct of brand is like, well, sure, but it's outside of my P&L, so it's, I'm not involved. How do I think cracking the business model around the secondhand market is going to be a game changer. And actually the brands have everything they need, right? In terms of, they have the customer base, because then we're talking about vintage pieces and iconic pieces. They have all these added value services, making sure that the product is authentic, doing the maintenance or repair. Like, there is a way to commercialize and to take ownership of the secondhand market. And I think the brands who are starting to do that, I'm starting to see it in watches, and some of the jewelry brands are, I think, doing a good job on that. But I think there's so much more to explore. Again, the market is happening without them. And so the quicker they get involved in that, the sooner that they can benefit from it. And I think really, to me, that is the true proof of how desirable your brand is, that the product just lives on.
And even just to tap on what you said, I absolutely agree about the secondary market. And even there, if your product is desirable even on the secondary market, that is really the ultimate dream, right? Absolutely. Thank you. And Mollie, closing remarks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we need to really keep in the forefront of our minds to make sure that we keep a perspective, a clear analytical perspective on our internals within our company, but also what is the customer exterior view, right? So all the pillars that we've known within the retail industry, making sure that we don't compare, you're creating and branding our uniqueness, etc., all stand true. But we need to be, again, more analytical as well. So, for example, conducting customer sentiment analysis. Is that a word? But that's really important to do, and not just, when you're in, I'm sure you experience that when you're in your realms, right? When I'm in Longchamp, my nose is in it, and I live and breathe it every day. we tend to not necessarily see things objectively. So doing, actual surveys on customer sentiment analysis is really important for you to have really an objective view on how, people see your brand, how your customers see your brand. I'd say another point is do experiential audits. And by that, I, do not include, high customer service, because that is not a differentiator. That is an absolute must. So again, what kind of experiences can you offer in your store that brings you an added value, essentially. And thirdly, I would say, take a sort of a benchmark of what all the other brands' stories are, on your markets on a global standpoint, and basically continue to hone in on finding your own unique voice. And that stands true, by the way, for brands that, have a deep heritage to them. It's not because you're 100+ years old, that you don't need to relook at your brand story. You have to, because the times are changing. If we don't change with our times, if we don't listen to basically to what our audience needs and how we can basically tweak without changing who we are on a core level, but we need to learn how to tweak our storyline to adapt to our audience. So I think those are maybe another 3. There have been a lot of 3s, sorry. But yeah, those would be the 3 points I would mention. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mollie, Fabienne, for sharing your insights. We do have a few minutes for some questions from the audience. So please go ahead.
I have a question for Mollie. Mollie, thanks for all your 3s summary. Hi. During the COVID, what would be your summary of how you look at things? What are you going to do to your team and your stores? And how are you going to, whether you're going to cut the budget for marketing or whether you're going to move on, how are you going to continue the business, especially with the lockdown of all your stores?
Okay, so that's a very big loaded question. Sorry. So no, we're not cutting our marketing budgets. If anything, we're beefing them up. We have used this pandemic time to really duck our heads and study in more depth what it is that, again, our customers are looking for, and how we are going to tailor that on a store level, on an online level. We're not yet in the metaverse. We will, but that's not yet, thank God. But so we're working on that, and we've our new store concept, for example, we call it RISE, which I love, and it stands for Reinventing In-Store Experience. I love it, RISE. We all can rise, after the pandemic, a little bit, if not a lot. And so it caters to, it's a very worn concept. It's one that, again, I was alluding to earlier, is much more humane in so many ways, in terms of tackling the sensorial sides of the in-store experience. So we've done that. We've reanalyzed our real estate inside out. We on the team level have we thankfully Longchamp is a family-owned company, and we value the humanity of the individuals we employ. And so we've had no retrenchments. I've had to do 0 retrenchments, which has been amazing and a godsend for me because I have a lot of obviously friends in the industry that had a very different experience. And so very thankful that I didn't have to do that. However, we did have to be analytical here too in terms of re-examining positions. Okay, so for example, when you're looking at a person who's a retail manager, well, we also know that training equates to sales, right? So a retail and a training manager in one headcount makes sense. So how do we morph jobs in order to create new ones? And when we create new ones, we're of course looking at the digital realm. We're looking at, the HR realm, again, the management of our people on an emotional side. Because again, we can say all we want in terms of our being in a post-pandemic phase now. The psyche is still very much affected in all of us, whether or not we want to talk about it, realize it, or what, so how do we deal with flexibility in terms of the humanity and of the employees we lead? The list can go on, trust me. So, but I'm going to stop my monologue now, but to leave maybe way to any questions for Fabienne, but it goes on.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Good morning. Thank you for a very inspiring and interesting discussion. Fabienne, I have a question for you around, you mentioned sustainability earlier. How important is it to include sustainability concepts within the marketing of a brand? Because so many brands have been accused of greenwashing, like just pretending that they're doing the right thing and not. Does one focus on it beforehand in the marketing, or does the luxury consumer just expect the brand to be sustainable?
The luxury consumer definitely expects the brand to be sustainable. And it means that it has to be sustainable throughout. So you can't have a big talk and then do a ridiculous pop-up, which is full of stuff that you're going to throw out the next day. You have to be consistent throughout all of your organization, all of your activations, all of your marketing, your retailing. It has to be throughout your organization. And it's really, really difficult to do. Also because I think we're all just learning about what is sustainable and what is not. And sometimes the most unexpected things are not as sustainable as you thought, or maybe you think that you're replacing by a better option, but as it turns out, it's not a better option because there's so many different factors. And I think we're still learning, and also the consumer is learning. So there's the reality and there's the perception. And sometimes you are actually doing the right thing, but the consumer still thinks it's the wrong thing because they're not educated about it either. So I think as an industry, I think as a society, we're all learning how to take care of our planet better, and we're still at the very beginning, but it seems now that everywhere in the globe, it's come to the realization that this is real and we have to deal with it quickly and well. And I think there's really an expectation from consumers to see brands take the lead, and we need to look into it and to take it seriously and to really give it the resources that it deserves to make sure that it's a long-term permanent change throughout.
Sorry, Fabienne, I have a question for you. Speaking on the secondary market, we all know that like Audemars Piguet, Rolex will open the secondary market. Catching on Watchbox plus Watchfinders, in your own opinion, how soon do you think that more markets or more brands will open to the secondary market?
I think it's driven a lot by also younger consumers that have less of a barrier towards temporarily owning a piece, right? Because the secondary market, there's resale, there's also the whole part of which is rental, which is another part that brands are exploring on how to delve into. I think there's reticence from the older generation because that's just not how you consume luxury. And it feels almost like it's a shame, or it's just not right. But I think it's not at all the case in younger generations, and those are the consumers of tomorrow. So the market is going to grow, I think, with them on how to be able to include all the different parts of the life cycle of a product. I mean, a luxury piece can last for for true luxury, it can last for several generations. And so keeping track on how the life cycle evolves across different customers, whether it's resale or rental or both, I think in getting the brands involved is going to be a key evolution in the luxury market.
Last question. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to the audience for your questions. This concludes the panel discussion on the art of creating brand desire. I hope you found it insightful, and I wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you.